Well, we have some breaking news. President Trump announcing he has just spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He wrote this on Truth Social. I just finished speaking by telephone with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. The call lasted approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. We discussed the attack on Russia's docked airplanes by Ukraine and also various other attacks that have been taking place by both sides. It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields. Those were those Ukrainian attacks on the airfields with the drones. We also discussed Iran and the fact that time is running out on Iran's decision pertaining to nuclear weapons, which must be made quickly. I stated to President Putin that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And on this, I believe that we were in agreement. President Putin suggested that he will participate in the discussions with Iran and that he could perhaps be helpful in getting this brought to a rapid conclusion. It is my opinion, the president continued, that Iran has been slow-walking their decision on this very important matter, and we will need a definitive answer in a very short period of time. A few interesting notes here. First, just yesterday in Istanbul, you had the Ukrainian side meet with the Russian side, and they were talking about swapping injured soldiers, but they admitted there is no immediate end of peace in sight, an immediate ceasefire. Not only that, we know that Russia is a close ally of Iran. They partner together strategically, militarily. So any assistance on that front could push Iran perhaps into an agreement. So two interesting notes there. And Ari, this all comes against the backdrop of President Trump saying, I'll know in 2 weeks whether Putin is serious. And he said that about a week and a half ago. So this development coming as he's really prodding Putin to push towards peace.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like there's going to be any prospect of peace between Ukraine and Russia. If there were, if the president had any inclination from President Putin that there was something encouraging, we'd have seen it in that Truth Social. Its absence speaks volumes. Look, I think the only way to get peace between Ukraine and Russia is for Ukraine to continue to bring the war into Russia. That strike against the 40 Russian long-range bombers was instrumental in telling the Russian people and the Russian government there's a cost to you for continuing your attacks in Ukraine. You need a stalemate in order for two parties to come to a peace terms. Right now, there's been an imbalance until this recent Ukrainian attack inside Russia. I don't know if the Ukrainians can sustain it, though. And if you're Russia, you might want to just continue to keep the attacks going because you think you can win. That's why I think this was very risky for President Trump to think he could be the peacemaker. America's strong. President Trump is strong, but we can't do everything around the world. And I think if Russia and Ukraine won't make peace, we can't do it for them.
Kayleigh, interestingly, in the middle of that Truth Social, is President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields. I'm sure that caught the ear of Zelensky.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing to Trump's credit is we have full confidence that both Putin and Iran, all these other countries that he's dealing with, know for a fact that Donald Trump is not messing around. I think what's happening here is Putin is deliberately testing the bounds to see how far he can push Trump, how far he can push this administration before receiving a really harsh rebuke. But Donald Trump is not messing around. And I think that these countries know that, the American people know that, and that's why they elected him to handle our foreign policy.
Yeah, and Laurie, this comes against the background of the Hill. The Russia hawks are meeting today. It's a bipartisan group. It's Blumenthal and Graham about potential sanctions on Russia. You know, notably, I always point out President Trump on his watch, you did not see Putin go into sovereign territory. You did see that with his predecessor. You saw that with President Biden. There was an absence for years. So there is a respect there that could be leveraged by President Trump.
Yeah, and he's talked about that, too. You know, we didn't see the issue in the Middle East. When Donald Trump was in the White House, we didn't see an issue with Russia, in large part when he was in the White House. I interviewed last week on my show General Keith Kellogg, who is a special envoy to Russia and Ukraine. And when he was talking about the discussions that have been had, that he was privy to between these two countries, he says Ukraine is very clear on what their parameters are, where they are, and what it would take for them to come to a peace agreement. Russia is not. He said they will not actually give us any framework to use. And so I think that's the needle that President Trump is trying to thread. If there's anyone who can thread that needle, if there's anyone, to Kayleigh's point, who can tell the rest of the world, I mean business, and they know he means business, it's President Donald J. Trump. And I'm still hopeful that we're going to see peace.
Keith Kellogg is the perfect person to talk to, Emily, because there's the public conversation where President Trump is broadcasting one message. The private conversation with the world leader is very, very different. And sometimes we've seen that spill over in Oval Office meetings we've covered here. But how he talks to Putin, I know from talking to Kellogg, it's going to be in a tough manner. Kellogg has stories about him picking up the phone, talking to the Taliban, to Baradar, saying, do not harm the head on an American troop. And thereafter, many, many months, not a single American troop was harmed. Those kinds of hard conversations are the hour-and-a-half ones that happen behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think we've caught glimpses of that in the public eye of exactly who the president is. He's the same off air as he is on air. And I think while that may have surprised members of the public, it doesn't surprise those who look at him with respect and value the fact that he is authentically himself in every conversation. I'm grateful that you pointed out the Ukraine point, because I think specifically that Putin apparently talked about sort of a retaliation. And I point that out that Ukraine bombed them because they were the ones that were invaded. This is an oversimplification, but it seems to me that Putin is sort of interested in an eye for an eye at every point of the way, because, to your point, Putin sees Ukraine as his territory. Like, nothing less than subsuming it back within his borders will suffice, because to him, that's a loss. That was a lost territory this entire time. He sees it as not sovereign. So I'm not quite sure if that approach and that perspective that Putin has is something workable on the Ukrainian side, because it's like football penalties. I mean, he's like, oh, I have to get them back for this. Wasn't it enough that you invaded? But clearly it's not. So tough road ahead. I agree that my faith is in our president to get it done if it's possible, but I think we still have a rocky road ahead.
This is also where I question President Trump's ability to influence these events, because President Putin does not care. And we, as Americans, we don't have much leverage over Russia. We're adversaries of Russia for the most part. We don't do a lot of commercial trade with Russia. So we don't have the leverage we have in other places that President Trump can use. So I think this is a lonely mission for President Trump, and he's going to quickly come to the realization Putin's not listening. America doesn't have a lot of leverage. There are other priorities for the United States around this world.
And he also said last week that something is off with Putin. Something is different about Vladimir Putin. So I'm wondering if that's playing into this as well. Maybe it's a different Vladimir Putin than he dealt with the first term in office.
Or it's the same Vladimir Putin who's always been.
And Putin, it's worth noting, I know that all eyes are on Ukraine, but he is constructing on the border of Estonia. They call that the edge of the free world, because that's where you start to get into NATO territory. Does he have designs beyond Ukraine? Let's certainly hope not, but we'll see.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.